This is ContraZoom.
Where we go back and forth about film.
I'm Dakota Arsenault.
And I'm Matthew Simpson.
On today's show, we are continuing our A24 Retrospective series. This is our 34th edition of the series, and you can go back and listen to recent episodes like 304, A24 Retrospective Val, 292, A24 Retrospective The Witch, or go way back to episode 108, A History of A24 Films, to get the full backstory on the company. Today, we are jumping ahead to cover 2016's Oasis Supersonic, directed by Matt Whitecross. This is a documentary covering the Britpop group led by brothers Noel and Liam Gallagher, tracing their roots from inception up to their massive Knebworth Festival concert in 1996, where they played to 250,000 people.
Joining us today is friend of the show, Alex Watson, who was last heard on episode 299, the 2025 Oscar draft. The reason we've jumped ahead to cover this film is that Oasis has recently started their massive reunion tour after being broken up since 2009. Alex is a massive fan who has tickets to see them and reached out back when the tour was announced asking to come on the show specifically for this doc. So welcome back, Alex. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. How are you guys doing? It's good to be back on the show.
Excellent. Yeah, like Matthew said, you had reached out to me saying that you wanted to come out to this episode to talk about this film. And before we kind of get into our thoughts on the episode, I'm really happy that you did, because I think this timing works out perfectly, and I'm glad that we're doing this episode now.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be talking about this movie because growing up in the UK, obviously, like I was a big Oasis fan. I mean, obviously, What's the Story, Morning Glory, and Definitely Maybe, they were on regular rotation during my teenage years. But it's also just really good to kind of go into the documentary itself because, as you said, the timing works perfectly. I'm hopefully still going to their concert in August at the new Rogers Stadium in Downsview Park, so we'll see how that one goes. But yeah, no, it's just interesting to kind of do a deep dive into this movie and really kind of share my thoughts on them as a band and kind of, what the movie covered.
Nice. Well, I'm definitely very excited to get into that. Before we talk about our Oasis fandoms, let's first give a little bit of backstory on this movie. Oasis Supersonic was released in 2016, directed by Matt Whitecross, who had directed films like The Road to Guantanamo and The Shock Doctrine, but was mostly known as being Coldplay's signature music video director since 2008. The film is entirely made up of archival footage of the band, including early photos and home movies through their extensive coverage in the press. All the original band members, along with the Gallagher's mom and brother, who is not in the band, provide voiceover narration describing in detail the events covered. The film opens with footage of their massive 1996 performance at Knebworth Festival in England, before tracing the routes the band took to get there, and once again closing out with it. The film is co-produced by Asif Kapadia and James Gay Reese, who worked on A24's previous music documentary Amy, which you can hear all of our discussion on episode 265, a show that Alex also guested on. Supersonic was given a limited release in the United Kingdom on October 2nd, 2016, where A24 then acquired the American rights to the film. It was given a one-night event special engagement on October 26, 2016. This is going to be a spoiler-filled episode as much as a documentary like this can be, so if you have not watched the film, I suggest doing so first. Let's start by talking about our own history with the band. Alex, you are someone, like you said, who was born in the United Kingdom and saw their influence on pop culture firsthand as you were growing up, and you wanted to come onto this pod to talk about this film. So let's start with, when did you first get into the band?
It was when I was around, I would say it was my last year of high school I really got into them because Oasis, they were kind of really, they were everywhere during like my early childhood because, I mean, Wonderwall, Don't Look Back in Anger, I mean, they were everywhere on the radio stations. But it was really, I would say, when I was around 16, I think, that I really started getting into the band. I remember like playing Some Might Say, and it really, I mean, I know it's a cliche thing, but it really changed my world a lot, and it opened up a lot more of my musical tastes. And just really, I always found the kind of the dynamic between the brothers fascinating because you couldn't go on the news or read the newspapers growing up without seeing something about the Gallagher brothers. I mean, they were like a soap opera almost, and there was so much infighting in between the band, and like you didn't know how a band could be so successful, but yet nobody seemed to get along. And it was really kind of from that aspect, I always found them kind of interesting. And plus their live shows as well were just always really spectacular. Like, I think my family will probably attest to this, but I watched their show from Main Road in Manchester in '96. Probably, I would say so many times it's a miracle the videotape didn't break, because it was just such an incredible and just raw live show that it was just, I've never seen anything like it. And I'm really hoping they can recapture some of that for August this year.
Interesting. And have you ever seen them before?
No, I never saw them before, unfortunately. I mean, I tried very hard. Remember the last time I tried was when they played Heaton Park in Manchester. That was right before they broke up in 2009, I think it was. But unfortunately, ticket demand was like so big and just I lost out. So yeah, I'm hoping I'm making up for lost time this summer.
Nice. What about you, Matthew? Do you have any sort of a history or personal connection with the band?
I don't have a real personal connection with the band other than that, like, What's the Story, Morning Glory came out in what, 1990? Let's get this wrong, 1995?
Yeah.
And I was 14, and it was, I mean, the previous one definitely maybe had been out for about a year. And so, like, we were all sort of aware of them. But then, like, Wonderwall and Champagne Supernova, Don't Look Back in Anger, like, all of those songs broke huge here. And suddenly they were everywhere. So I was never the biggest Oasis fan, but, like, you couldn't, walk 10 feet without hearing one of their songs in the 90s. And those two in particular, Wonderwall and Champagne Supernova, were, like, huge everywhere. Everyone knew them. Everyone sang along when they came on the radio if you were at a party. And they were kind of inescapable. And then, much like Alex was talking about, like, just the inner drama of the band was never not in the news as well. So it was always interesting to hear about the Gallagher brothers, and trying to decide which one was a bigger jerk was always a topic of conversation.
Yeah, I would say that I first started getting into music in the early 2000s, where I would, it wasn't just what my parents were listening to, it was me sort of deciding what I liked. And by that point, I was aware of both Wonderwall and Champagne Supernova. And at that point in the band's tenure, I feel like they were more notable for their antics than their music. And so I think that kind of turned me off on them, and I never really got into them. Like, I don't mind those two songs, and frankly, watching this documentary, I realized how few Oasis songs I actually know. Like, I didn't realize that Supersonic was a song, and didn't realize that was their first big hit, so that was a surprise to me. So I am not the definitive voice on Oasis, so I will say that, but you guys might find this interesting. I technically was at the show in Toronto when I believe it was Noel got punched in the face by a fan at Virgin Festival. I didn't care about them, and so I was leaving the venue early, which was on the Toronto Island. So I was waiting in line for a ferry when this happened, because me and my friend didn't care about Oasis. So I was there on the premises, but I did not see it happen until the next day on the news when it was everywhere.
Well, fun fact, my sister has actually technically she's seen one half of Oasis, which is more than I have. She went to go see Liam Gallagher at Nebworth a couple of years ago. So she has technically seen at least something that resembles Oasis, because I think half of his set list is just Oasis songs anyway.
That's funny.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the thing that struck me most, and this is like the dumbest, shallowest thing, but the thing that struck me most rewatching this after not listening to or thinking about Oasis for at least a decade, if not more, probably more, is just how distinctive Liam's whole posture is when he sings.
Yes.
I don't know why that resonated with me so much, and why, like, as soon as I saw that sort of, like, hands behind the back, leaning forward, hunched, microphone like a little too hot, like, that whole thing, I was like, oh yeah, Oasis. That's my memory of Oasis right there.
Yeah, he is very distinctive in the way he stands at the mic. I've got to say, it is something he absolutely owns, Liam.
Yeah.
I find it funny where when the reunion shows got announced, there's this Australian DJ who makes videos for Reels and TikToks and things like that, and he does a really good Gallagher Brothers impression. He was doing all these hilarious skits, and I was enjoying them. And I didn't realize how accurate his impression was until watching this documentary as well. They are quite a caricature of themselves, I would say, which is interesting.
It's funny when I actually lived in Manchester for 5 years, and honestly, it's incredible when you live there, when you realize how many people. This was like years after Oasis had broken up. You realize how many like Mancunians are still trying to like emulate them, the way they dress, the way they stand, the way they speak. It's like crazy. Their effect on pop culture has been like pretty significant.
Let me ask, actually, just as an interesting minor aside. So you lived in Manchester, you're from the UK. Obviously, they were a bigger deal there than I think they were here, although they were a huge deal here. But are they, and this is something that maybe we can get into when we talk a little bit more in depth about the movie, but like, are they as like tied to Manchester as something like, say, Pulp is to Sheffield? Like, are they like,
I would say
are they that intrinsically tied?
There was definitely that element where they were tied to Manchester, particularly like the Manchester City like supporters and stuff like that. So yeah, they are definitely considered definitely a product of Manchester, and they're the kind of like the proud like local story. But if you were to compare them to, like, for example, bands like the Stone Roses or like Happy Mondays or any of those from the kind of like the Manchester type scene, I'd say it's not quite as high, because Oasis are kind of considered to be like kind of a more universal thing, whereas like the bands like Happy Mondays, they were tied more to that kind of era than Oasis were.
Right. That makes sense. I was just wondering, because like there are bands like that are like very intrinsically like, well, like Pulp is the best example of being like a Sheffield band, right?
Good example too.
Interesting. That's a very good question. But yeah, let's sort of talk about the way this movie is structured. Is, like I said, it starts at kind of this 1996 massive concert, and then sort of shows the creation and formation of how the boys got into music, and then starting bands, and then eventually creating Oasis. And then it's a very short period of time. Like I didn't quite clock when Oasis was formed to when it was. Oh, okay. No, never mind. I did write this out. Their first proper gig as Oasis was in 1991. So this movie basically takes place in a span of 5 years, and they went from creating a band to being, I don't know, arguably the biggest rock band in the world in 1996 at that time. And it's just such a meteoric rise. And that's why I was very curious about when you guys were first introduced to them and came across them, because it sort of feels like you can hear about a band and you're like, oh, I recognize this song, and then the next thing you know, they're absolutely everywhere. And from what my recollection and watching things like this movie show is just how quickly that explosion happened, and how quickly they were all over the place, which is just so fascinating. But let's start with the very beginning of the movie. This is a movie that is narrated afterwards, basically. So we're looking at this footage, and then we're hearing the stories of how it's happening. So you're always looking at things in hindsight. But Matthew, how did you find, especially the early years in the formation, how did you find the narration working for that in terms of being objective versus subjective?
I mean, it's not objective at all. So, like, it's literally just the boys talking about the band and like their mom talking about the band. I actually really liked the narration. I liked the way, I like the way the film committed to being like, they're just going to play the clips of them talking, of whoever talking, put their name on screen so you can tell who it is, because they all sound very similar. And then just show clips. I kind of wish there was more footage. Like, they clearly have a lot of like archival, like home videos and such. And I kind of wish there was more of that without narration. But in terms of like listening to them speak, listening to everyone speak and say their different sort of like truths about different events that was happening, I thought worked really well. Like, it's a fun conversation movie. It's a nice way to do it that's not just talking heads as well. So I thought that part was reasonably engaging. Yeah, I thought it was fine.
And Alex, you as I said, we're on the episode that we did about the documentary on Amy Winehouse, Amy, and it basically follows a very similar format. The difference being, of course, Amy Winehouse had passed away by the time the documentary was made, so any footage we hear of her was from that era that it takes place in. But other than that, it's people talking about the events afterwards. How do you find this type of movie comparing it to Amy?
Well, I actually find it's a very, I do like, I kind of agree with Matthew's point of view. It is kind of, I think, more of an interesting one than a talking heads kind of thing, because I feel it does help the movie flow a lot better, like particularly because we were dealing with a very fast paced like period of time. I mean, obviously we were focusing on from when they were like forming the band to being one of rock's true giants. So yes, I do find it interesting how they use more audio rather than pictures. I mean, talking heads, it absolutely works, and I do love the use of it. But for this kind of film, I thought it was actually it worked very well, I thought.
Yeah, I agree, because there was actually times where I wasn't quite sure if they were using archival interviews as the narration or if that was all narration. So in aspects, I think it worked pretty well in transporting me back to time. Obviously, there were moments that you can tell that maybe they were adding a bit more context of like, well, we didn't know this at the time, but this is what ended up happening, sort of thing. And for that, I think they did a pretty good job in terms of how the narration was structured to make it believable. I also really appreciate that they do have it was a 4-piece band for the longest time, that the other 2 original band members, who we never actually get their full names, we just get their nicknames, Bonehead and Gweegsy. I appreciate that for the most part. I feel like they tried to be as objective as possible, talking about what their experiences were at the time. And it wasn't until we learned that they're no longer in the band that they sort of talk about the maybe what feelings or anger or frustrations they might have, both with their time in the band and with the brothers as a whole. Did you find that, Matthew? The 2 guys who are no longer in the band?
No.
No? Okay.
I didn't like, I found, so here's my great problem with this is that, like, I think it's really interesting to listen to the boys speak, and I think it doesn't go into any real depth in anything in particular, except for how much Liam and Noel butt heads. So anything about like the guys who left the band, even like toward the end where, wow, I watched this last night and I can't remember anybody's name. But like when is it Gweegsy who ends up getting like exhausted and needing a break from the band, and then they kick out.
It was Gweegsy that, he left the band for like a short period of time, when they were in America, yeah.
And like he leaves the band, and then they get a replacement for a while, and that guy's like, I can't deal with this, and leaves the band too. And like, that's really interesting. But all of that stuff is like just Liam and Noel being like, yeah, they couldn't handle us, like it's just like, it's all very slight. And I didn't find any, this is my big problem, I didn't find a lot of depth in any of it. So yeah, no, not at all.
Yeah, I'll agree with you there in terms of the amount of depth. I thought we learned a lot about how Noel and Liam make each other angry. In fact, my favorite line in the whole movie was, I wrote this down, was that Noel has a lot of buttons and Liam has a lot of fingers, and that's probably the most accurate description of them as a unit entirely. Because they just seem to needle each other a lot, and I thought they did a great job of exploring that relationship and how they would often get angry or frustrated with each other and what they did to retaliate against each other. But you're right, outside of that, we didn't really learn a lot about it. And I think a lot of it is masked by the fact that they are so candid and will say the most ridiculous, over-the-top statement, which includes lots of profanity, that you feel like they're saying something deeper than it actually is, when in reality, when you're sort of analyzing what was actually revealed, there's not a ton.
I just love the two quotes at the beginning of the movie where Liam says, Oasis was like a Ferrari, great to look at, great to drive, but it was spin out of control when you go too fast. Then you follow up with Noel saying the Oasis's greatest strength was the relationship between me and Liam, but it's also what drove the band into the ground in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I would have appreciated everything you're saying is I agree with, and I would have appreciated more depth into like why their relationship was so tumultuous. I feel like we didn't really like that's the deepest part of the movie, and simultaneously not deep enough for me personally. Like it feels very surface level, and I wanted more. I wanted more from this movie. I think it's fine. I think it's especially if you're a fan of the band. I think it's probably a good watch. I think it's an interesting watch if you're not a fan of the band like me. I just wanted more depth from all of it.
Yeah. I as someone who A, was not much of a fan of the band, and B, didn't really know anything about them other than, it was fronted by two brothers who fought a lot. I left this movie not knowing a ton more than I did going in. They're like, obviously you learn how they were formed and a bit about their childhood and things like that, but like I could have learned probably a similar amount by reading their Wikipedia pages or something like that. So Alex, I'll turn it to you. As someone who is a diehard fan, did you feel you learned anything new in this movie that you didn't know, or something that maybe Matthew and I might have missed or not clocked that helps add more context or gravitas to anything about the band and their history?
Well, yes. I mean, I knew a lot about the Gallaghers themselves. Like, I knew they came from Burnage, which is a very kind of rough area of Manchester. They had a very tough upbringing. When their dad was both their parents were Irish immigrants. Their dad was very obviously abusive and hit obviously very physical towards the brothers as well. And I did like the later scenes where they kind of covered when their father showed up at their gig in Dublin and how basically they were trying very hard not to react, even though it was clearly bringing up some very bad stuff. That was something I wasn't actually aware of, when I watched it. But in terms of their backstory and stuff like that, I mean, it's been so well covered in the English media. It was kind of that point where I was thinking, well, what more is there to learn about them? And I was kind of hoping that they would go a little deeper rather than just the kind of the glory years. I mean, there was so much more that came afterwards. I mean, there was their album Be Here Now, which ended up being kind of the catalyst for really their downfall. Then it was followed by the disastrous tour of Australia, where Liam got in some pretty serious legal trouble. Then there was kind of all the kind of infighting in the band. And there was a lot of different incidents that happened, kind of particularly in the later years between the two brothers, where they were constantly fighting in the media. Sometimes there'd be physical altercations. I mean, there was so much more they really could have covered that maybe, for example, fair weather fans might not have been aware of. So I feel honestly it was a good movie. I liked it. It was a very good tribute to the band, but at the same point, I think as you guys said, only surface level. I wanted it to be deeper. It's like that scene where Noel's saying, "No, I want more." I kind of felt like that a little bit towards the end of the film.
Did you find that, for years, the band, the two brothers sort of fought with each other, both, very publicly on stage and then also in the press? You have this movie, which both Liam and Noel are producers. It was released in 2016, so I imagine it was made, in the year earlier. But the band at that point had been broken up for over 5 years. Do you find that they were able to talk about each other in a way that helped explain the other person without being too mean-spirited? Obviously, I feel like when we got to the portion when the band almost broke up, they sort of get a lot more critical of each other. So how did you feel that the two brothers did talking about each other?
Well, I felt they were at least kind of a little more restrained in how they spoke about each other. Yeah, there was a lot of profanity. There was a lot of kind of insults or backhanded compliments flying around. But there was, I felt, portions of the movie where Liam and Noel did kind of show that they did have a respect for each other. Like, I really like the scene where they where Noel actually kind of confessed that Liam was cooler. Like, he can rock a Parker.
Mm.
Like, I always kind of envy that a little bit. So I did feel there was portions of the movie where they did show that even though there is animosity between the two of them, and I think there always will be, to be honest. I don't think they'll ever be best friends like on or off stage, but still there was at least, I felt, a margin of respect between the two of them, even though clearly I think the urge was there to complain about each other, and they did. But yeah, I felt at least Noel and Liam at least kind of were at least able to put it aside somewhat in this movie.
I mean, that's the nature of being brothers, though, right? Like,
yeah.
And this sort of goes to also, I'm just actually scrubbing through the movie right now because I'm realizing I don't 100% remember if this was in there. But this movie goes through 96, and if memory serves, correct me if I'm wrong, because it was pretty late when I was watching this, but like the incident where Liam heckles Noel during Unplugged isn't in the movie, right? Like
that
they're pretty shit to one another a lot of the time too. So
they were
like as much as and that was like a big deal. Like I don't know, I'm not sure. I couldn't tell you what it was like in the UK, but I remember here that was big news. Like that was all over the news when it happened. As much as it does show like their animosity, and it sort of, I feel like it's trying to like, and maybe it's true, maybe it's correcting the record that like their animosity is both is the thing that drove them to the ground, but also it's the thing that spurred both of their creativity. Like the film does talk about at least a couple of their songs where like Noel wrote them after some crazy fallout with the band or some incident with the band, and like maybe that strife was good for their creativity, but it also doesn't really get to like the depth of how much they really seem to not hate each other, but like there's brotherly discord, should we say, that I feel like that film like glosses over a bunch of it, I think.
Well, there was one really ugly incident between the two of them. I think at one point they were doing a gig in Barcelona, and that night they were in the bar. They got very, very, of course, a lot of beers were flowing. And Liam, I think, basically told Noel Gallagher, "Your daughter's not even yours," which, of course, ended up in a pretty serious fistfight between the two guys. I mean, it got nasty between those two. It really did at times.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely seemed like as producers, they sort of took it. They allowed themselves to take out the worst aspects of themselves.
Yeah, and also there's a moment near the beginning where Liam gets hit in the head with a hammer, and like that could explain some things, and maybe could also, there could have been some like stuff that could have delved into that at all, except it just was like, yeah, I got hit in the head with a hammer and now I understand music, and that was all of it, like. But maybe that kind of thing can have an impact on behavior. Maybe the documentary should have talked about that more. I don't know. Again, depth is what this film misses for me.
Concussions didn't exist in the 80s, Matthew. Come on.
Oh, that's true. That's true. They're a new phenomenon.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, the one thing I thought this movie did a good job at showing was, I mean, the one thing I always knew about Oasis gigs growing up was Oasis gigs could be very unpredictable. This is the one thing this movie did kind of do a good job of showing was, for example, I mean, there's that one point where Liam throws his voice out during a gig and he ends up just walking off stage and saying, "Yeah, Noel, you cover this." I mean, there always was kind of trouble at Oasis gigs. The gigs could either end early because people were throwing things. There was like always seemed to be either they could be absolutely glorious like the Nebworth gigs, or they could be those early scenes where you see them playing kind of the smaller venues and like people are throwing shoes or bottles, and Liam's like saying, "Look, if you're feeling tough, come up to the front of the crowd. I'll slap you in front of everybody." So yeah, I mean, then I think the line they say is "Trouble seemed to find us." And the thing was, the band really seemed to lean into that, I felt. I mean, even like in the later years, they would kind of lean into kind of the chaos that would ensue. And that was something that Matt Whitecross did do a very good job of showing, was just how unpredictable Oasis gigs could be depending on the crowd.
Yeah. I also like it definitely though doesn't lean into like, trouble finds us. Sure. But people who say that also kind of tend to be assholes. So, like and I feel like it doesn't dive into that enough. I don't know. Maybe maybe I'm being too critical of this because it is a little bit slight, but.
Well, in fairness, the Gallaghers kind of fully leaned into it, I think, as well. I mean, I think they had the whole thing of like, if you're not causing trouble, you're not a rock and roll star.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, it's tough to really talk about this documentary because like there isn't a lot of meat to it. Like we learn how they formed, how they got their big break, how they exploded in popularity, and then it weirdly ends with a note of them saying that they wish they would have retired in 1996 after playing this concert, which is very much looking back with rose-tinted glasses on the world, where like, of course, there's no way they were going to stop when they play a show that big. That just means you keep going at that point. But yeah, a lot of stuff does seem to have been omitted. We were talking a little bit before. Specifically, I think the biggest thing was their infighting and being pitted up against the band Blur in terms of who is the biggest Brit pop band at the time, which is interesting because I feel like in recent years, Damon Albarn, who's the frontman for Blur, and the Gallagher brothers have sort of come to a bit of a pretty grudging respect of each other and appreciation of each other's music. So it would have been really interesting to include that aspect, even with their respect that they have for each other now, and talking about their feelings of how maybe the press pitted themselves against each other more than they actually did, or things like that. Or maybe it was like a Beach Boys Beatles situation where, you know, when the Beatles heard Good Vibrations, they immediately had to come up with a response to it because it was unfathomable to not have the best written rock song of the period. So is that something that you felt like you missed there, Matthew? I'll start with you.
No.
No? Okay.
I mean, I did really appreciate this film diving into the writing of the songs a little bit. It was the area that had the most depth for me outside of them, the boys hating each other. So, no, I need to think about this for a minute more. So I'm going to let Alex go because I feel like I need to like process this question a little bit better.
Yeah, because the one thing I thought they really should have kind of talked about was it was the summer of '95, and you had basically it was referred to as like the Battle of Britpop, where you had in the same week you had Blur were releasing Country House and Oasis released Roll With It. I mean, that was all over the media for those weeks, like who was going to get the number one single. In the end, it was Blur, but it was huge because they were two like of the biggest bands in Britain, kind of going toe to toe, and it really came down to like, were you Blur or were you Oasis? Because I remember that as a child, you were either one or you were the other. Like if you were a Blur fan, you were kind of like, I don't know, you're a bit more artsy. If you were an Oasis fan, you're a lot more kind of like, you know, Jack the Lad, you like going out drinking, you loved your rock anthems. But yeah, I really wish they had gone into that rivalry a little bit because it covered so much of the British media over those 2 years. Because they were both at the peak of their powers at that point, and really, it is interesting the attitude towards each other now, because back in those days, I mean, the Gallagher brothers were very open in their disdain for the band. Like I remember when they won the Brit Awards, which they show towards the end of the movie, like when they won one of the awards, they kind of like mockingly sang the lyrics to Park Life to kind of wind Blur up. So yeah, it is interesting now how the animosity has kind of cooled, but I feel that would have been a very good topic because it came within like the 5-year period that they were talking about. So I thought that was really something they should have really covered, because it would have, I felt, made the movie a bit more kind of electric in places.
Honestly, like the more we talk about this, the more I kind of just wish that it was a documentary about the rivalry between the two bands. You know, like how it played out, how it came about, how they egged each other on, how it played out in the media, how it eventually subsided a little bit, like in the state they're at now. I feel like that would have been a much more interesting story, personally. I don't know. Am I alone in this?
I agree. No, it's tough because I'm not crazy about the band as a whole. I don't think there was a better story to tell that would get me personally, as a non-Oasis fan, more engaged.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because like I definitely listened to more Blur as a kid. Like Oasis was everywhere, but Blur was the one I would like listen to, mostly because like they were on a couple of compilation albums that I had that I liked. But I'm also not a huge Blur fan. Like I'm a big Gorillaz fan, but I'm not a huge Blur fan either. But I still feel like that would be way more interesting to me personally. Sorry, Alex, I cut you off.
It's okay. Just say I felt between, yeah, because obviously I will say this about the two bands. Basically, I feel I mean, Damon Albarn kind of conceded that Oasis won the war because they have been kind of like still more successful over time. But I always kind of felt that Blur was the better band musically because their albums were always different. They were unafraid to take risks. Whereas Oasis, they kind of stuck to the same kind of formula. They knew what sold and they had no interest out. They had no interest in moving outside of the anthems that they wrote. But I would say basically Oasis was more successful, but I think Blur was a better band musically.
I think that's a fair point, actually, because Oasis definitely had a sound and stuck to it. And Blur, and by extension, Gorillaz, Albarn definitely takes more chances, explores more things, tries new things more frequently. So yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. And I'm sort of on the same boat as you, Matthew, there, where I also am more of a Gorillaz fan out of all three of the bands. Yeah, so like even doing like I was saying, an Oasis versus Blur, sort of what their whole thing was about wouldn't have been that interesting to me because I also wasn't that huge into Blur. Although I would say the few songs I know of Blur, I like more than the few songs I know of Oasis. But once again, that's just me. So I really don't know where else to go in terms of what is actually covered in this documentary before we sort of talk about maybe their legacy overall. Is there anything else, Alex, you want to specifically highlight in this film?
Well, the one section that I thought was interesting was the section where, because obviously, I mean, it's shown that like obviously in the UK they were like a runaway success, but it's really interesting. I found the scenes where like early on when the Gallaghers went to America. And in particular, like, Liam admitting, like, I went there with a chip on my shoulder. And just really, I think there is, I mean, and it was interesting how they went over there kind of with already this kind of disdain for American audiences. And I thought that scene when they showed the gig at Whiskey A Go-Go, where all the band had been doing crystal meth for 3 days. They were given completely the wrong set list. Everyone was playing a different song, and the gig just kind of became an absolute shambles. I mean, I heard when one thing they didn't say was Ringo Starr actually turned up to that gig, and apparently he left early because it was just such a terrible show. But yeah, I felt that was kind of Oasis at their most kind of self-indulgent and problematic, because this is one thing that I think Oasis has never really, I mean, they've been popular over here, but American audiences have never really appreciated them because I think partly because of their attitude and how quite often when they were over here, shows would get cancelled, there would be issues. So I actually kind of like the scenes when they were talking about their time in America, which was really kind of the big reality check that they needed.
I think that's a good point. Like they definitely, by the time they broke big here, by the time they came to North America, like all their baggage came with them. Like we didn't have any grace period. We were like, oh, this is a good band. Oh, maybe they're a bunch of assholes. It was here. They're like, they're a good band and they're a bunch of assholes. Like we knew. So yeah, maybe that's an interesting point. Yeah, I like that.
And I remember when the tickets for their American tour went on sale, there's a really good YouTube channel by a guy called James Hargreaves. He's like an Oasis super fan. He does these big deep dive videos into their history. And he actually kind of pointed out that when they released the tickets for their American tour, there was kind of a very cryptic message with it that said, America, this is the time for you to prove to us that you wanted us all along. And he kind of pointed out that whenever they've had American tours, there has always been issues. Like they've either been canceling shows or they've said something in the media that was kind of taken out of context. There just always seems to be, I don't know what it is, I mean, obviously, and the problem with the Gallaghers is they're very open with their dislike for Americans. I mean, they don't have a lot of filter in terms of what they can and can't say. I mean, if they don't like America, they'll say, we don't like America. And this is kind of the attitude I got from the movie is they went over there already with like, we're going to conquer this place. And when audiences didn't immediately take to them, it kind of got to a very problematic point where the band was very difficult to promote when they were causing those kind of issues.
Yeah, like a very, very like, for lack of a better word, adolescent, like, well, you don't like me? Well, screw you attitude.
Yeah, it really was.
What about you, Matthew? Did you feel that there was anything else in the film that we haven't covered yet that you want to highlight?
No. Everything that I wanted to talk about is there. I mean, I took notes while I was watching this, and just as like I'm going to use a bad word, so feel free to censor me when you edit this, but like about 30 minutes in, my notes read, wow, Liam's a cunt. So, like, that's pretty much my whole thought of the movie is that like I just wanted more from all of it. So there's that's my only real thought is that it's fine. Like it's fine 3-star documentary. I bet it's a really fun watch for people who are bigger fans of the band than me, which I think Alex can confirm. But it's fine. It's only fine. I just wanted more from all of it. There's no, I wanted more depth. I wanted more breadth. I wanted more. So there's no one thing I wanted covered in more depth. I wanted everything covered in more depth.
I did like the last point I will say that I did like about the movie. I thought the one thing they did do very strongly was that scene towards the end where Oasis had their show in Dublin and their father kind of showed up. Clearly it was an attempt by a newspaper to kind of provoke some kind of headline, but just that scene when they're in the bar after the gig and their father was like standing, like obviously looking at them, and like Liam wants to go over and like obviously, kill him. And Noel's like telling him, don't react. Don't react. Don't give him anything. I thought that was one of the rare moments in the movie that did actually show the love between the two brothers. I mean, yeah, they didn't like each other, but at the same point, Noel was refusing to let his brother like do something dramatic or do something that was potentially going to like cause some issues. I did actually think that was quite a touching moment, that even though they hated each other, Noel still loved his brother enough to hold him back and to say, this guy is not worth anything. Don't go to him. I thought that was actually one of the moments in the movie I wanted more of, was kind of more examples of like, even though they hated each other, but there was at least kind of moments of love between the two brothers. Because clearly, I mean, obviously it's hard when you're in a band with your sibling, but it was good to see at least there was moments where Noel could at least rein Liam in to an extent, where he realized that the things he was going to do, they were going to be life-changing. And I think that was one of those moments. So I thought that was something the documentary did very well, was kind of highlighting the abuse that they did suffer, and just how their father was a constant issue for them, and just how the media really was trying to obviously provoke some kind of exchange between the two of them.
It's just tough. I just don't really feel like I'm very similar to Alex in my note, Matthew in my notes, where I don't really have a ton here to talk about. I guess we could sort of talk about their sort of legacy after this 1996 concert. And, as I mentioned earlier, they talked about how they, in a perfect world, they should have retired on top, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. Obviously, they continued to have a pretty successful career. Obviously, it was mostly marred by infighting that was more notable than the actual music they released, as I don't think anything really quite topped the highs of those first two albums. But Alex, for you, how does the rest of their career sort of fit into what is discussed in the movie? Do you think that they alluded to anything or sort of felt like they could have included in there that happened post 96?
Well, I think the one thing they really should have talked about was kind of just Be Here Now was kind of the album that Oasis fans talk about kind of as the turning point, because it was when they were at the point of their kind of the height of their drug use, the height of their self-indulgence, and really just the height of tensions kind of between the brothers. When it came out, it was like immediately like it was critically acclaimed. People were raving about it. Then a couple of months later, people were saying, well, actually, is it good? Is this actually worth our time? And then kind of opinion about the brothers kind of really swung like pretty quickly after that. So I felt that was something that they could have spoken about. But also I think as well, it would have been good to have some honesty from the brothers about their later recordings, because they've been very open. I mean, like maybe like albums like Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, I mean, Heathen Chemistry, all those kind of like mid albums that they did that were kind of really just fillers, if I'm honest. So I feel honestly the movie was probably smart to cover that glory period, but there was a lot. But I feel as well it would have been interesting to talk about the evolution of their later albums, how the band themselves were dissatisfied with them.
What about you, Matthew, in terms of things that you wish that they maybe have covered post 96?
I mean, again, all of it, everything Alex is talking about, more depth on how they like. I mean, they obviously peaked in the 90s, and I know they're still popular and beloved. But they definitely peaked in the 90s and then tapered off until they broke up in 2009. So I would have liked to have seen any of that, basically.
Fair enough. Okay, well then, in that case, let's move over to our game portion, which is where we're going to give a double bill pairing. And the rules are as follow: we're gonna pick a movie that you should watch with Oasis Supersonic. The only catch is it cannot be another A24 film. So, Alex, as our guest, let's start with you. What movie would you pair with Supersonic?
I thought very hard about this one because there was a few pretty fun pretty fun documentaries I could pair with this one. Instead, I'm going to and the movie I'm going to choose to for this one here is Ondi Timoner's documentary Dig, which was about the kind of the story between the Brian's Jonestown massacre and the Dandy Warhols. I felt if you're talking about kind of like drama and like infighting between different members of the bands and just really pure rock and roll chaos, then I think this was a really good double bill because it does really show kind of like how, I mean, the Brian's Jonestown massacre were definitely the better of the two bands, but Anton Newcombe was kind of similar to Liam Gallagher. He was kind of like really a guy who had a lot of buttons and a lot of fingers, buttons and a lot of fingers to press. So, and it's really an example of how one band can really implode because one member's like so self-destructive, whereas the Dandy Warhols went off to Europe. They had a they had a song in a cell phone commercial and they became huge like overseas. So it is, I think, in terms of the like the feel of the two movies, I feel this would be a perfect double bill.
Interesting. I am also vaguely familiar with both of those bands, but I'm not familiar with this documentary. And it does sound like it would be very similar in vein to the style that Supersonic is.
Yeah, it's definitely worth a watch. It's one of those movies that sadly it has kind of faded from view over the last like 20 years or so, but it's one of those movies I really feel is worth a reevaluation because I remember seeing it like maybe 2005, I think it was. And it's just one of those movies that you watch thinking, wow, what the hell happened here? So yeah, it is one of those movies that would pair very well with Supersonic.
Nice. And then Matthew, what about you? What movie would you pair with Supersonic?
So I actually didn't have to think about this very hard at all. The whole time I was watching this documentary made me want to rewatch a film called Pulp, a film about life, death, and supermarkets, which is a documentary about the other Brit pop band Pulp. It basically follows it's basically a concert documentary. It's their like quote last concert that they played in Sheffield, and then interviews with the band, but also more interestingly with just random people around Sheffield talking about Pulp, because that band is so tied to that city, and it's very very interesting to hear like the perspective of all these like quote normal people. There's one interview with a woman who'd come over from America. There's a really memorable interview with these two old ladies talking about Pulp, in their thick Sheffield accents. It's kind of wonderful. And then also, and sorry, Alex, but every song in the documentary is a banger and it's all performed live. So like, it also suffers from being a little bit too slight. Like it's a little bit, doesn't really have the depth that we're talking about wanting from this one. But because it's a concert documentary, I can let almost all of it slide. Because you're basically, no matter what's happening, you get to watch this amazing concert for 90 minutes. Just with interviews interspersed. And like, as you know, as a kid, as a teenager in the 90s, I was very much like, I was very much aware of Blur and Oasis. And I didn't really discover Pulp until I was in my 20s, and I didn't really love Pulp until I saw this documentary in 2014. And now, of all the big, the big four Britpop bands, which would be Oasis and Blur and Pulp and Suede, I guess would be the fourth, right? Is that right, Alex?
Yeah, Suede, or even for example, maybe someone like Ocean Colour Scene was also popular around the same time as well.
Yeah. But anyway, so like, yeah, the Verve as well. But like, very much so. Like as an adult, I've really come to like Pulp is my band of that group. And they also, the documentary is really fun. It's a great concert, and also they just released the latest album in like 25 years. So what a great time to be alive.
I'll never forget when in the 90s when Jarvis Cocker mooned Michael Jackson at the Brit Awards. That was just a media firestorm. I mean, it was just hilarious to look back on because it seems so minor now. But back then, he was basically being like, I mean, he's still banned from the Brit Awards even today for doing that. So yeah, it was actually, yeah, Pulp was one of those bands that really kind of, I feel their music has aged pretty well. And even so, even now, I mean, it's good to see them back together again. And I loved their set at Glastonbury this year. It just really was just like rolling back the years again.
Yeah. And just like, again, they seem so beloved by, like, it's been a while since I've seen the documentary, but there's a scene in the documentary where a group of old folks sing their song Help for the Aged. And it's kind of like worth watching the documentary just for that sequence. But yeah, it's great. It's sadly not streaming in a lot of places in Canada, but I know it's on like Canopy and a bunch of other places in the States. And I'm pretty sure it's everywhere in the UK, but it's a little harder to find in Canada.
Interesting. And then for me, I kind of I was leaning towards two picks, and one of them I wondered if one of you guys would pick it, and you didn't. So I guess I'll go with the bigger one first, and then I'll just name my honorable mention just to highlight. But I'm going to go with the movie from last year about Robbie Williams, Better Man. The reason being is that the Gallagher brothers play a minor role in that film, and you sort of see them in a similar era of how someone else viewed them, of both being the coolest people in the world and the biggest twats in the world. And that's sort of Robbie Williams' perspective on that. And also, more people need to watch Better Man because that was a fantastic film, and one that I thought got overshadowed by the meme of people being like, who's Robbie Williams? Which I always find obnoxious when people do that. It doesn't matter what it is. If you don't know what it is, just look it up. You don't have to make it a meme that you don't know something.
It's also a very distinctly American, like, you only hear that from Americans, and it's because he's not super popular there, even though he is literally, for at least for a time, was the most popular recording artist on the entire planet. But no, he can't be popular if he wasn't popular in America. Like, it's very obnoxious, and I hate it.
Yeah, like I'm too young to know the Take That era stuff, but like I definitely knew his music as a solo artist and knew how big of a deal he was. Like this is not a new thing. I think it was an issue of, it was young people going, I don't know who this person is, so let's make a meme out of it, and I didn't like that. But yes, Better Man is an excellent film, and the Gallagher brothers are portrayed in this quite hilariously so it's worth it for that. And then my sort of honorable mention that I'm going to give a shout out to, in the documentary, they talk about how for their second album, they recorded at a studio called Rockfield. There was a documentary that was made called Rockfield, the Studio on the Farm, that I covered Hot Docs back in 2021. And it's sort of the history of this recording studio, where it literally was these two brothers who owned a farm and decided to buy some musical recording equipment and transform it into a studio. And this is the studio that basically birthed heavy metal, because in the documentary, Ozzy Osbourne, who also conveniently timed, unfortunately just passed away, credits them with allowing them the space to go harder and heavier than they ever had before, thus creating heavy metal for Black Sabbath and everything that followed. But specifically in Oasis Supersonic, they talk about Rockfield in the scene. That's when the brothers had their first big fight, when one of them, I can't remember who, was drinking in town, brings a bunch of the local drunks to the studio, where they end up, having a big party and destroying a bunch of things and sort of disrupting the recording process. And the other brother did not like that. And so what did they do? They had a fist fight, of course, as they often did. But if you're wanting to learn more about that studio in particular, there's a somewhat interesting documentary called Rockfield, the Studio on the Farm. I'm going to link to my review in the show notes. I wasn't crazy about it, but then again, if you want to see some cool music clips from iconic, mostly British bands, this is the one to check out.
Interesting you're talking about Robbie Williams and Oasis. That was the one news story I remember so vividly growing up, because it came to that point where you literally thought that the two of them were going to get into a boxing ring, and you thought Liam and Robbie were going to get into a boxing ring and kind of like bash out their differences. Because I remember when Robbie Williams left Take That and he started hanging around the Gallagher brothers, the media kind of portrayed him as like, oh, he's completely lost it. And I think the story is, I think the Gallaghers didn't like that he was trying to get in on their bad boy image. And I think the words that they said to him were, I think they said, like, aren't you just a tap dancer from Stoke? And apparently that's convinced him to stop hanging around with them. And then it was basically 20 plus years of kind of infighting between the two of them. I think things between the two of them now still aren't great, to be honest, because Robbie Williams will often take snipes at them during his concerts. Like, I think at one of his concerts he started playing "Don't Look Back in Anger," I think at one point, one of his homecoming gigs. So yeah, I think it is. Yeah, I do look forward to seeing Better Man. It has been on my list for a while, and I just love the idea that Robbie Williams had of him being a CGI monkey. I mean, that was just genius.
It was great. For the first 2 minutes, it's a little weird, and you try to get used to it, and then you just kind of completely forget it because they do such a good job with it.
Oh yeah, it's on my list, so I'm looking forward to seeing it like real soon. And plus, the soundtrack's gonna be great because I mean, I wasn't a huge Robbie fan, but he did have those really good anthems that you will always sing along to.
Yeah. Have you seen Better Man yet, Matthew?
No, I regrettably have not. My wife doesn't have any interest, and so it's hard to find time to watch stuff without her sometimes.
That's fair.
But it is on Paramount Plus now, so I don't really have an excuse. And I've really wanted to see it. I just haven't made time for it this whole year because I haven't really had the time this whole year. So I'm watching a lot of things, but I don't have a lot of time to watch things I'm not assigned to watch at the moment. So
that is fair.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a great place to end this episode. Alex, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your insights on the band in this documentary.
Well, thank you so much for having me, guys, and thank you for allowing me the chance to kind of nerd out on Oasis for a little while. And I'm counting down the days to the concert in August. Hopefully, I'll be able to share some good photos and videos, and hopefully they'll put on a good show for me.
Yeah, hopefully they're not broken up by the time the date rolls around for you.
I remember there was a joke when tickets went on sale on online. There was kind of this meme going around saying, like, when people waiting on Ticketmaster, there was this meme saying, "Sorry, Oasis has broken up while you were in the queue. We apologize."
Yeah. Well, Alex, if people do want to follow you on social media, what's the best place to do so?
You can follow me on Instagram. I got 2 different accounts. I'm either Al_Watson1, or you can go to my other one, which is at AE Watson. I'm also on Blue Sky at Flowering Snows, and a little bit of self-promotion here. I also recently self-published my first novel on Amazon. It's called The Pieces We Carry. It's available on Kindle and on Amazon anywhere, and Amazon all over the world.
Amazing. That's right. I completely forgot you just published your book there. I will link to that in the show notes, so people please go out and check that out and buy that, rent it. However you read books, you definitely should pick it up. Matthew, once again, thank you for coming on, being here with me today. Where can people find you and more of your work?
The easiest way to do that for me is to check out my homepage, which is stretched.ca. You can also find me on social media, mostly on Threads, but also on Blue Sky. I am Smatthew AF on one. I think I'm Smatthew AF on both of them, actually. I don't know why. I'm bad at social media. I don't know if I've ever said that on the show, but I'm really bad at it. At least in terms of the like promoting myself way, I'm really good at the shitposting way. And then also like, as of very recently, if you search up my name on Rotten Tomatoes, I am on there now, and that's exciting.
Woo-hoo.
So yay for industry validation. So that's fun.
Yes. So now Matthew is a shill, and you cannot trust any of his movie opinions because he is paid to write these things.
Oh yeah, man! I'm just waiting for my bank account set up to make sure I get those Disney payments. This can't wait to buy a new house based on them or whatever people are doing these days.
No, in all seriousness, it is. I'm very proud and happy that you are now tomato approved. You are an excellent critic and is very much deserved.
Well, thanks, man.
Of course,
it feels weird, but in a good way.
Yes, I imagine so.
As achieving one's goals does. Yeah.
Yes. Well, this has been a That Shelf podcast. Visit thatshelf.com for more great film discourse. Follow the show on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at ContraZoomPod. What are your thoughts on Oasis Supersonic? Leave a comment on Spotify or send us an email. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. And if you really like the show, consider tipping us on coffee. Thanks for checking us out.